Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. My name is Rob. I organize Idea to IPO. We've been doing events in Silicon Valley for many, many years. We always have a busy calendar of events. I want to highlight a few events that are coming up. Thursday, November 7th, Venture Capital Panel, Investment and Latest Innovations in AI. That's in Palo Alto, actually just down the street. Thursday, November 14th, in this room, a Venture Capital Panel, how to get the right investors for the long term. A little bit further out, December 5th, in collaboration with the Commonwealth Club, Ben Horowitz of Andreessen Horowitz in Santa Clara. So check out the details for those events and all of our events on our website, ideatoipo.com. We launched officially on February 1st, 2010. At that time, we had no members and no events on our calendar. At this stage, we have over 60,000 members among all our meetup groups in the Bay Area. We've organized, promoted, and produced over 2,100 events. We're the most active, most prolific startup event organization in Silicon Valley, bar none. Is that it? Okay. All right, I'll expand on that. We're actually the most active, most prolific startup event organization in the history of Silicon Valley. Wow. And stop. I'm not done. So if Silicon Valley is the global center of entrepreneurship and innovation, that would make us the most active, most prolific startup event organization in the history of the world. I'm not bragging, I'm just stating a fact. Our mission is to promote entrepreneurship, support entrepreneurs, build community, and provide value in the Silicon Valley startup ecosystem. To that end, we provide content that is practical, actionable, and relevant, stuff you can actually use to succeed as entrepreneurs. And we believe in building community because Silicon Valley is an aspirational ecosystem that attracts people from all over the world who come here to do great things. Who here is not originally from Silicon Valley or the Bay Area? Who here was born and raised in Silicon Valley or the San Francisco Bay Area? 4 natives. Let's hear it for the natives. So welcome, natives. So whether you were born and raised here or just arrived last night, it's important for us to provide multiple channels for you to meet people, build relationships, and grow your network. With regard to value, it is important that we provide value at each and every one of our events. So we make sure our events are affordable, and if you cannot afford the cover charge for whatever reason, come talk to me and we can work something out. And at each and every one of our events, we make sure that we provide a delicious buffet meal. Is that a delicious buffet meal? Well, let's hear it for Procopio for sponsoring that delicious buffet meal. Most importantly, though, at each and every one of our events, we want to make sure that we provide value for your time, which is your most valuable resource. Anyone here getting any younger besides our panel? Right. So when you invest, maybe that young lady in the back, so when you invest your valuable time to come to our events, we want to make sure that you maximize your ROI. We have many partners that help us do what we do. Law firms, venture capital firms, angel investor groups, incubators, accelerators, colleges, universities, lots of players in Silicon Valley. So tonight, once again, we're grateful to Procopio for hosting us at this beautiful venue, providing the delicious buffet meal, and also providing us with an awesome moderator. So let's hear it again for Procopio. A few of our other partners are here tonight. I would like to have them come up and say a few words. Let's hear it for Smart Bumper Sticker and Kerfaz. Applause.
The Smart Bumper Sticker is a battery-less microelectronic device which you put in your car sticker, and it records collision data. And you put phone on top of it, all the data comes into your phone through NFC, and you press a button, it goes to insurance agency. One-click insurance claim. We are solving insurance company problem, but they don't have to investigate because they get authentic evidence of collision. We have prepared this prototype here, and we are putting firmware in it. This is, and our final product will be something like this. And this is our competition. And this is our competition, Stone Age technology. A red bubble burst, it means it has been damaged. That's it. It doesn't tell anything. And I am looking for a co-founder and EDA professionals on 3G basis. What is 3G basis? Give me the money, or get me the money, or go away. Thank you very much.
All right. Next up, we have Pi Capital and Bill. Let's hear it for Pi Capital. Applause.
Thanks, Rob, for having us. And it's one thing to know you have the best network here, but he really does. Those of you who've never been here before, and Roger, this is one of my best venues. There you go. Please make yourself at home, sir. I just wanted to say thanks to Rob for letting us give a 15-second pitch. Pi Capital is a technology platform that helps you get funded. We've eliminated the back and forth with VCs, and you upload the information, we guide you to the money, and we invest ourselves as well. But it's pi.capital, and Rob said 15 seconds, and I've gone over. So I just want to thank him for having this panel. Yeah, and also Dr. Benson couldn't make it, and she's the digital health partner, so she sends her regards.
Thank you, Bill. So here's the schedule for the rest of the evening, ladies and gentlemen. So we'll launch into our panel discussion, which will be compelling, informative, entertaining, dynamic, and exciting. Right, guys? No pressure. Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, hold your questions until 8 p.m. At that point, we'll open it up to the audience. We'll take as many questions as possible. 8:30 p.m., we're going to end the formal program. We actually have a quick raffle, and you'll have an opportunity to win an awesome prize. You can stick around, network, socialize, and connect. At 9 p.m., we would like to leave the building as a courtesy to Procopio. If you want to keep the conversation going, we have some options: Starbucks, Rosewood, whatever. Let me know what works for you. I know it's Tuesday night. If you, at any time during the formal program, you need to get up and use the restrooms, get some more food, it's okay. It's a very informal atmosphere. So at this point, I'm going to pass it off to our distinguished moderator. He's one of the top corporate and startup attorneys in Silicon Valley. He's a partner at this distinguished law firm. Most importantly, though, he is passionate about helping entrepreneurs succeed. So let's give it up for Roger Rappaport.
So how you all doing tonight? Excellent, excellent. Welcome, welcome to Procopio. I know Rob mentioned us, but I would want to make sure that our CEO thinks that we paid for dinner. So I'm just going to give you the 15-second pitch for Procopio. It's a full-service law firm, over 200 lawyers, 27 different practice groups. I head up our emerging growth and venture capital practice group, so I deal with startups from inception all the way through exit. I am a recovering entrepreneur of 10 years myself. So I just tell my clients, do what I didn't do or don't do what I did, and you'll be fine. Okay, so great. Let's get started, and maybe just it may be useful for the panel to figure out, who's in the audience tonight. So maybe we could just see by a show of hands who is currently in a health tech startup. And one that's got traction. So you've got a product, you've got users, you've got some kind of sales. Who's in that health tech startup? Okay. Who's in a health tech startup that doesn't have traction? Okay, good. So who's just an enterprise employee and not in any health tech startup? Okay, excellent. Who's a government employee? No recordings. Okay, great. So who's an academic or a healthcare professional? It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. Yeah, okay, excellent. So who's an investor besides our folks here? Investors. All right. Yeah, you don't want to put your hands too high up because then you won't get out of here before midnight. Heaven forbid, but any other lawyers here? No? Okay, excellent. Journalists, bloggers, PR people, any of them? Nope. Okay, so anyone that's in a health tech company or is, at the ideation stage, thinking about getting in a health tech startup? Okay, excellent. Okay, great. Well, I think you've got a broad array of people here, so this ought to be really interesting for the panelists as well. And maybe what we can do is, Mohan, we could maybe start with you and just give us a little bit of your background, what you've done, your serial. As we were talking over dinner earlier, I was trying to keep count of the number of exits, and I kind of lost count with 10. So tell us a little bit about your background and what you're currently doing as well.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. It's all Ravi's fault. Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry. Yeah? Okay. By way of education, I'm an engineer, EECS. Started my career here in Bay Area with Intel, HP after that, so two great companies. And necessity becomes the mother of invention, in which case I had grown up from gotten sort of from a software engineer to managing large complex projects on Unix, and did not have a project management tool. And so that's how I kind of jumped the fence and started the first company. And from there onwards, there was no looking back. Lots of mistakes made, but somehow or the other we survived. And that got exited. I did an enterprise software, then I did a telecom software. I also did a first wave of .com. And a dear friend suffered through cancer, and one thing led to the other. And when I saw an oncologist and a pathologist looking through the microscope at a place like Stanford, looking through the microscope with a mechanical counter, that kind of dawned on me that when we are celebrating the victory of software against the chess grandmaster, and here in a place like Stanford, in the middle of Silicon Valley, you have pathologists using the mechanical counters, that didn't sound right. So that took my turn of an entrepreneur journey into technology applying to bio, and I started a company that eventually got acquired by Roche, Bioimaging, which was a pioneer in the digital pathology space. After that, I did, using the technology we had developed, I did a cancer diagnostic company, and a very interesting way. I call it innovation for affordability, or how do you bring the cost of the test down to an affordable point, and that sort of stuff. And that journey finally led, once that company was acquired, to focusing on translation research, particularly in the immunocancer therapy area. We're very fortunate to work on the ground floors of Parker Institute, which is really focusing on immunocancer therapy and applying innovation in technology to speed up the translation research. It's a classic intersection of where biotech meets, the infotech, and very delighted to really build out a platform that will hopefully one day help some researchers find cure for cancer. Because at the end of the day, our goal is to, really do whatever it takes to find the cure for cancer.
Excellent, thank you. So Aldo, you're also in a unique spot. You're both an entrepreneur, currently involved in a startup, and an angel investor as well. Tell us a little bit about your background.
So, like Mohan, my name is Aldo Carrascoso. My name is not Mohan. So I'm a hybrid. That basically means I'm an entrepreneur full-time, but I've experienced some success in the past that has allowed me to do a number of angel investments, whether it's in health tech, whether it's renewables, whether it's software as a service, whether it's blockchain. I'm not actively looking for deals, but a lot of deals land in my lap. I'm part of a number of different syndicates. So I've got very good people just putting me into different deals, but again, I'm not actively looking. That's on the investment side, which is basically less than 2% of my life. The 98, almost 99% of my life, I'm an entrepreneur, but not really. What people refer to me as a serial problem target. So I'm not a serial entrepreneur. So problems keep finding me. I keep starting companies. basically. So I've started a number of companies in the past, very early in digital media. In 2008, started a company called Jukin. It's currently the world's largest payments licensing platform for user-generated content. I think we invented the word viral videos. We have over 500 billion views right now on globally, and over $100 million have been given back to independent video creators using our platform. Successful exit, and then very early in blockchain. Got into blockchain in early 2011 because I sent money back home to the Philippines. Long story short, corrupt banking system, correspondent banking for those of you in finance. So we did the first US dollar blockchain Philippine peso in 60 minutes. Started a company called Aligned, then became Veeam, and successful exit there. And then I got into life sciences because of a great inspiration but a terrible tragedy. So my family has been decimated by cancer, which is why I've for the past 3.5 years, I've just really involved myself in understanding next generation biology. I found huge frustration in trying to figure out, this whole problem of cancer and why we haven't reached a certain point that we need to be while our cars are driving themselves and we're thinking of mining asteroids. So it was an incredibly frustrating experience. So I found two scientists, one from UC Davis, Dr. Carlito Librilla of UC Davis, and Dr. Carolyn Bertozzi of Stanford. They're glycoproteomic expert and mass spectrometry experts. Long story short, their biggest problem was software and artificial intelligence. So we started a company called InterVenn, and happy to tell you more about what we do. But we have a laboratory diagnostic test that basically interrogates the glycoproteome, and it can tell you right now the first product is for ambiguous pelvic masses. So 20% of all women in their lifetime will develop this unknown pelvic mass, and out of those 20%, 12 to 18% are actually malignant. But unfortunately, all of those are removed, and they're usually detected at stage 4. So we have technology that can detect that. I can't say yet, but our clinical trials just concluded with great success. So happy to provide some insights on healthcare and IT, and I'm sorry if this was such a long intro.
Excellent, thank you. So Jeremy's also got a stellar background from investment banker to GE Ventures, Genentech. So welcome, and give us a bit of your background, Jeremy. Currently with DCVC.
Can you hear me?
Hear you, it's not working.
Yeah, I'll use this one. So thank you for the intro and for hosting us. Actually, when I think about my career, my background in healthcare, it's always come back to my family. As cliche as it may sound, I learned recently that my great-grandmother was actually the head chef for a healthcare hospital. I knew that my grandmother was an ICU nurse, and my mom has always worked in public health. And so I've always been in these spaces surrounded by clinics and doctors and just gravitated towards it. So graduate degree in bioengineering, focusing on molecular biology and biomaterials. I really like the application side of healthcare and not being in a lab all the time. So I ended up going into healthcare investment banking as a journalist just to understand business. But ended up going to equity research just because you were able to understand technologies, companies, products, and just talking to doctors to understand how they triage patients based off how they presented and what that drug fit with. I think my curiosity kept going, and New York was getting tiring, and so I moved out here to California, where I joined GE Ventures, but on the digital health, med tech, and diagnostic side. So there I worked on everything from Series A to Series E. I'm most proud of the deal that I did with Rowan, working on Evidation Health, where it was around how do we use metadata and data, but to drive better outcomes for patients, because we're just at the beginning stages of that. even still, I was investing. I really wasn't getting close to the patient, and so I went to the operating side, and I went to Genentech, where I worked on commercial strategy and executing ops. And there, I worked on 2 cancer drug launches, and I think there I just came full circle. You know, when you get to see a patient who is on something that you've worked on, where you have prevented, you know, a potential stock out of drug. It doesn't show you how much impact you had until you see someone up there who's alive because of it. And for me, that really resonated. So after working 3 years on that drug, Alecensa, from pre-launch all the way to first line, point of reflection, realized I wanted to take time out. I went to Stanford GSB. There I looked at impact investing, public equities, and then venture capital. And at the end of the day, I feel like I'm having the impact that I want within venture capital, working with great entrepreneurs and early stage technologies that can change their lives. And so for me, I'm at DCVC Bio as a senior associate. We also have the Deep Tech Fund, but for the most part, we invest in therapeutics, computational care, health tech that is aiming to improve outcomes for patients, whether that be therapeutics or just in terms of communication.
Excellent, thank you. So last but not least, Ravi. Ravi is an engineer by background and also serial entrepreneur, angel investor, and something I found very interesting. Ravi has an affinity for female founders, and a number of your investments have been in that. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and also what you're doing currently.
Thank you, Roger. Unlike my colleagues on my left side of it, although I studied engineering at Stanford, I'm not a technologist. I have worked in the life sciences space, but I'm not a scientist. My interest is more from an angel investment perspective. But fortunately, because I've worked in both the technology side of it as well as from the science side of it, I understand a little bit of it, and gives me an opportunity to look at an investment and see if I want to invest money in a particular venture. I am not part of any angel groups per se. I like to evaluate this on my own, or sometimes it's just a passion that if I like something, I will invest in it no matter what the final outcome may be. Fortunately, out of the last 6 investments that I have done, except for one, 5 of them are on the digital health medtech side of it. One didn't do well. The other actually exited in about 4 years with about 3x return on that. And 4 out of 5 rather, are female-founded ventures. And one of them is actually all the way in Michigan, which is not a science-related thing. It's a Spanish website. But I have enjoyed doing that. And in about last couple of years, my interests have been more on the neurodegenerative diseases, because we are all getting old. Some of us are getting older. And if you look at the world population today, more than 600 million people are of the age of 65 or over, and the eventual population in 2050 would have about 1.5 billion people at the age of 65 or more, which brings in the neuro-related diseases. So a couple of years back, I was working with a group of people, including a professor at MIT who is an expert on the Huntington disease side of it. And then now, in the last year or so, I have developed more interest on the Alzheimer's side of it, because I had a relative who passed away, who had a tremendous dementia. And I see this as a big problem, and I want to see that although Alzheimer's does not have a cure and probably may not have a cure in my lifetime, what kind of technologies can we use to make people's lives better? So that's going to be my initiative going forward in the next few years.
Excellent, thank you. So maybe that's a great segue into talking about how do you folks, I'll open this up to the panel generally, how do you folks define health tech and talk about some of the hottest areas in health tech that you're seeing today?
I'm just going to give you quote-unquote official definition which is put forth by WHO. And it says an application of organized knowledge and skills in form of devices, medicines, vaccines, procedures, and systems developed to solve a health problem to improve quality of life.
Wow, that's pretty broad. What do the rest of you guys think?
So, what's interesting about health, so I don't come from the healthcare space. I actually come from the cloud data and the software side. So when I think of health tech and when people talk to me about health tech, there's this growing amount of information within the healthcare space, whether it's in a hospital vertical, whether it's in a pharma vertical, whether it's in a diagnostic vertical. Given the next generation set of tools, next generation set of studies, and health tech is when you start the amalgamation between software, data science, and healthcare problems, when they can all work together to basically improve patient outcomes. That doesn't just mean about, it's not just about long-term survivability, it's also about health economics, saving money for payers, and being a bit, and of course, something that I noticed actually when we started the company that I started now, and I still notice it to this day, is scientists will tend to throw away data. They do. They either discard it or they reduce scope. So it's, that's why you're hearing a lot of these health tech companies come out of the woodwork, trying to, use artificial intelligence or machine learning to find those needles in those quadrillion haystacks that, scientists have, that has eluded scientists. So sorry, it's a bit colloquial definition, but that's what I find is pretty common.
Jeremy, you're at a big VC. How do you guys define health tech, and what is it that you guys are actually looking for?
Yeah, so I would say on the Deep Tech Fund, there's more of a focus of computational care. So where does the interface of healthcare and, whether it be large proprietary data sets or machine learning come to improve outcomes for patients, so along the lines that you were talking about, but more specifically addressing pain points, and ideally across payer, provider, and patient, which is quite difficult to do. And I think on the biotech fund, we get to play around with the thesis a little bit more there. And so whether it be accelerating drug discovery, because we make investments within the biotech side, but much more in the platform area. But how do we use health tech applications and technologies to accelerate those drug discoveries? So that's kind of how we think about health tech.
Are you doing stuff in aiding clinical trials as well and clinical trial outcomes?
We are. I'm trying to remember if we've disclosed all of those things, but we try to look at it from a broad scope of how do we accelerate, how do we ideally get product to patients at the right time.
Mohan, what's your take?
Well, I'm going to dumb it down. I think we've heard the academic definition and the most complex stuff, but for those of you who are looking for ideas, it's very simple. Apply first principles. From whether you're trying to take the appointment of a doctor and the difficulty that you go through, to all the way finding the needle in the haystack that Aldo was mentioning. Every step of the way. Give you my example, right? It wasn't by definition. I was not really looking for anything, right? It was a dear friend suffering through cancer. I watched the pathologist at Stanford purely as an accident that I happened to go, I happened to walk, curiosity was there. And when I saw a pathologist with a mechanical counter, I asked a basic question, if radiologists are able to see a nice screen and sit in their pajamas and do the reads, why are these pathologists, chained to their chairs and looking through, straining their neck, right? So can you apply technology to solve their problem? So I think across the board, you can find, lots of issues, lots of things. And healthcare, partly by, how it is, has been the slowest in leveraging technology to solve the problems, unlike all the other industries. And now you see all these big buzzwords of AI and blockchain and this and that. But, it's all of that. But basic fundamental thing, right? You take your existing workflow, you will see lots of issues. What can we do to make that workflow easier, better, cheaper, faster, and better outcome? The word, I think, underneath all that stuff is betterment of the outcome. I think that's what it is, applying the basic principle, keeping your eyes and ears open, having that curious mind to find out what the problems exist, and applying innovations in technology to address those problems and make better will open up lots of opportunities for you.
And actually, when you talk about radiology, the X-ray machine itself, when you look at it, is a tag device, right? I mean, the whole thing started many, many, many years ago. Today, we talk about technology as AI and machine learning and this and that and all that stuff. But the roots have been there for a long, long time. Now we are coming up with newer technologies on the problem-solving side of it.
So as you guys think about the health tech space, are there any areas that you think are going to be dominated by the 800-pound gorillas? And are there any areas that you think are ripe for disruption or development by startups? Jeremy?
I'll jump in. I think the reason we haven't seen large companies dominate is because typically it's hard to do it in this space, right? You need to really understand the life sciences and medical practices, but on the flip side, you also need to understand computer programming, have data scientists, and typically those two groups don't work really well together. And so, when you're in Silicon Valley and you've got big companies who excel at the technology side, the egos will probably be a little strong and coming in a little aggressive in the healthcare space. And it's just highly regulated. And so I think it makes it a great opportunity for startups to come and to get traction and win business. The fact that Epic is the business it is today is because of the humbleness and because it was a grassroots. I don't know what it is today, but they kind of came out of nowhere. I will say things that remind me of successes is one company called RxAnte, and it was a very simple idea of, compliance is one of the biggest issues that we have in the healthcare system. I think it's like $100 to $200 billion in U.S. losses, and then it's one of the biggest drivers in terms of lack of outcomes, right? People not taking their medication. They basically made a platform where they either text, called, or sent a letter that was like the next day to take your medication, and then they tried to understand what populations did it resonate the best with, and that drove outcomes from a medical aspect. I mean, you didn't need all the bells and whistles of AI and machine learning to drive outcomes, and they were acquired very quickly after, I think, a Series A or B for like 300. So you don't have to make it fancy, just effective.
I think I would say the key difference is you got to find niches. For a startup, you have to find the smaller niches that are not attractive for the big boys. Give you an example. Again, going back to the digital pathology days, it was a new idea. People were not sure. People would always question me, why digital pathology? And when it becomes bigger, then you get that question, why not? So when it becomes from why to why not, that's when the bigger boys would get in. But innovation does not happen in large companies, whether it's Roche, whether it's GE, whether it's Philips. Innovation happens in smaller, things. So that's where we need to, identify those smaller areas, focus on it, You have an ability to turn on a dime where large corporations can't, right? And if some of those niches will become larger, then the giants will awaken, and by that time, hopefully, you have matured your technology, you productized it, you have some customer traction, that becomes a natural acquisition. So I would appeal to all of you guys to think of those nice niches that are not appealing to larger companies, but then you can apply the innovation, apply some smarts, and be able to be agile to address those.
But as you think about, they say there's riches and niches. Often when I'm sending clients to VCs and it's very nichey, they look at it and they look at the TAM and then they say, well, is this a potential unicorn? Is this too nichey in that it may not become a $50 to $100 million company within the 3 to 5 years. So do you, as you're evaluating companies, and maybe for all the investors on the panel, when you see something that is pretty nichey, are you thinking, this may not be a home run, but it will probably do for my investment thesis, or is it, what, it potentially could grow into that unicorn? You brought it up, Mohan, so maybe I'll just give you an opportunity to respond.
Sure. So I have a very different point of view. Not every idea is VC ready, and particularly Silicon Valley VCs, you got to have a 10x returns. Don't worry about the investment. Not every idea is going to be like that. Let's be respectful of that. But there are micro VCs where they don't care about $1 billion exit. If you have a small idea, you do a small amount of funding, and you have a $30, $40, $50 million exit, and that's very decent. Everybody wins. Okay, so I will take it from that perspective. However, though, that it might be a smaller idea to start with a niche, but then as you grow, that niche also will grow and expand. Okay, so you'll always have a roadmap. You'll always have something that you can protect, you can defend, you can own. It's better to be a king of the hill, than essentially just nothing in the mountain. So again, I would say, don't go by just because VCs aren't going to like it, don't jump on it. No, you have to have that, passion to say, this is the problem. Verify that problem. Solve the real problems of real people, you will build the company. Companies are never sold, they're always bought. And why are they bought? Because you're solving the real problem of real people. If you have this mindset of, I have to do this because my VCs are going to like that idea, it's wrong. You will never succeed. No VC will invest because you're telling them what they want to hear. It's necessary but not sufficient.
I think that's great advice.
So from an entrepreneur perspective, if I can give an example of one company that I invested in, this was D school student out of Stanford, and she had gone into a very niche area of a catheter device that is held up here and make sure that the flow of oxygen is maintained. She knew that this was not going to be a $100 million venture, but she was very passionate about it. She sold the company in 4 years at about $20 million. And even if she made $5 million out of it, who would give her $5 million in the job? I know, in 4 years, nobody would. But she knew exactly what she was doing, and she went after that market. In the process, the investors also made their money in a shorter period of time rather than waiting for 10 years and finding out that the company went kaput.
Right.
So,
I think to their point, there's one word that I'm being very careful of using in front of, so I'm coming at it from an entrepreneur and from an investor point of view. It's the P word. And whenever I hear this from either an entrepreneur or whenever I talk to an investor, I'd be very careful. It's called the platform, right?
right.
I'm seeing a lot of smiling faces here. Platform is a very dangerous word in life sciences. I find it to be so true, given for us, who's actually from the tech side here? Tech side people. Okay, so in the tech side, when you build it, they will come. That's what we believe, right? Agile Scrum. That's the total opposite of what you should do for life sciences. I got schooled very, very early. So now in my investment thesis and how I pitch to investors right now, you're being very careful about the application of the specific technology you have. I agree. I think I'm very focused on a specific problem. So one thing that I have seen work with VCs, and for me to be interested in a deal, is when a founder is actually cognizant enough of the fact that there's a large application, but I choose to focus on one thing very, very well. That is the difference between someone who will get funded and someone who will not. And I've seen it consistently, whether it's for myself or it's for a number of different funds, in that, yep, you've got a platform, so what? And in tech, if we have a platform, it can do a bunch of stuff. Like blockchain is a platform. It can, you can build something. You can, you and your full stack of engineers can build something, come up and iterate. Get your first 5, get your next 10, get your next 100, and then you do something called cost of acquisition. It's a very easy economic that gets you to Series B, C, and acquisition. Here, that does not exist. You go for something called clinical utility. What a patient needs and what a doctor wants and what a payer ultimately cares about. And it's very different from how we think about opportunities. If you guys are pitching a platform, you better have a very crystal clear use case that goes all the way into who's going to pay for it or who's going to, the ultimate use case. So you guys have probably seen a bunch of these deals.
No, yeah, you see all these amazing technologies, and then you have to ask, how will the doctor use this? Will it be an incentive for him to use it? Who's going to pay for it? Will it be out of pocket? If not, what does the payer need to see to get it reimbursed for the patient? And if you don't hit any of those things, it's sort of like a big roadblock for you, and it can block an investment. But even getting back to the original is a venture capital investment. When you take an investment, you're signing up for a huge, and I'm sure you guys already know this, but it is a huge undertaking and it's a long-term relationship. And there are so many businesses that you don't need VC money and you can do really well. And so I think because we're in Silicon Valley, we're just under this notion that we need to. But if your business doesn't need it and it's not part of the model, then I don't think you necessarily need it. So just be aware of it, I guess.
Just one thing to one of your comments, you mentioned about who's going to pay for it and looking at payers. So I see a lot of deals, a lot of clients where the success is dependent on getting reimbursement, getting in with the payers, and so my sense is that payers are being hit on multiple times every day. So as you guys are thinking about investments, where the success of the startup is dependent in large part on getting traction with a payer, is that kind of the death knell for that particular investment?
I've got an interesting answer, and I'm coming from 2 perspectives. Alternative business models actually are very interesting. So in the US, 330 million people, there's 6.5 billion people outside the US. So what's your ex-US strategy? Because outside the US, no one cares about payers. I don't know if you've ever seen that. They don't. I mean, you probably go to Europe, sure, but in emerging markets like in Asia, it's very interesting for us personally to explore these things. It's very interesting when I hear someone say an ex-US strategy with an actual go-to-market where you don't need to go through a payer. You can go direct self-pay because people are actually willing to pay for these things, not in the US, but outside. The other one is you can have a number of partners outside the country that can do this all for you, rather than you do the entire process. But again, it all boils down to just basic business economics or the fundamentals. How much does it cost for you to run a test for you to run an assay? That's a very important question, right? If your assay costs $2,000 or $3,000, which is your standard NGS assay, how can you do that outside the U.S. and be, you can, but you're going to go for very, very tier 1 type of usage. So I think a big disruption that's coming is the cheaper assays. These assays that aren't necessarily, NGS or $4,000 based. So why? Your TAM increases drastically. One of the things right now that we're working on, and I hate it, I feel like I'm self-promoting. So if you think of Quest and LabCorp, what kind of companies are they? They're your diagnostic companies, right? They're not. They're logistics companies. They have, I hear, over a dozen planes in the air at any given time doing one thing, cold chaining your blood. All they do. It's all they do. When they take your blood, that thing has to go into a cold chain. It has to be maintained at a certain temperature, and if it doesn't, stuff happens to it. It becomes compromised. One of the biggest disruptions is the ability to disrupt that supply chain. Right? Imagine if you don't need to cold chain blood, if you don't need to cold chain, you don't need to do that for saliva. But what if you could do that for blood? So those are very interesting. So you look at the disruption not from the biology itself, but from business fundamentals like cost of goods, supply chain logistics. No one's looking at it. I don't know why. They're not being.
It's not sexy enough. I don't know.
It's not, yeah. I'd share another very good example. So my advice, if you have to really fight for, making a case to a payers, it's a very long haul. I'll give you a personal example. Creating new CPT codes for the procedures, I think it's not a startup's cup of tea. And I personally came to that conclusion when digital pathology, we were trying to invent a new CPT code, and I would have to raise, at least minimum of 10, if not more, millions of dollars to really do that. So, as an entrepreneur, what do? You try and figure out, make a case to what are the existing codes that you try and fit yourself into it. Because from the payer's perspective, it's a pretty simple equation. You want $1 for your new test, you show me how I could save $2. And that show is not hypothetical, they want a real world evidence, right? So I would say, stay away from those kind of complex, because the amount of time and the energy and the resources required is not really in the veins of a startup. That's not your core competency. Let the bigger boys, the Roches of the world, Quest and the LabCorps of the world fight that battle, but you don't get in. What I would suggest you look for is what are those existing CPT codes that you can somehow maneuver your way to really make them compliant so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. A personal example I'll give you. So digital pathology did not have appropriate codes. So when we realized that, we tried and figured out what are the other adjacent codes that we could leverage. And we did find that a computer-assisted diagnostics had a different CPT code, and that has an uplift of about $57. So we turned our entire revenue model upside down just on that particular stuff. As much I was excited about all the innovation in technology we did at Bioimaging, and all the patents we filed and all the IP we created, this one transformation of creating a new revenue model by lining up so that the providers also make money by using your software. And that was actually a brilliant move, and it just happened to be, at the right place that really changed everything. And so I would say, keep looking for those gaps. Keep looking for those areas where without having to reinvent the wheel, you could leverage the existing codes and be able to attain, that particular stuff. The second area I think Aldo's brought very well is, this whole methodology that we have is a cost plus methodology. It's a pairs, mindset. When you look outside, so good example would be, tests like Foundation One. They cost $5,000, and because the insurance pays for it, it's okay. But when you have to reach out to your wallet, $5,000 is a very, very expensive test. And so what I call the innovation for affordability is the only mantra you can give in order to really reinvent that wheel and come up with a lower cost that will be applicable to the people outside of United States where they are paying out of pocket. And I think there's a lot of opportunities like that where the very expensive tests through innovation, and that innovation comes both science and technology. You don't have to do 353 genes. Do the genes that are relevant. Find the narrow regions. That's the science part. And then apply innovation in interpretation and analysis to again reduce that overhead. And that's how you combining the two can really get. And it's a very exciting field. The innovation that is happening at the intersection of science and technology together is actually very happening, and you can really see lots of opportunities there.
So to that point, do you think that advances, and you're such a great panel for this question, I think, because you have engineering backgrounds, but are advances in computer engineering and computer science more important to health tech than advances that we're seeing in the life sciences? When you think about AI and ML and DL that's being applied to life tech applications, what do you think?
So you go ahead. Right. I'll give you an example of, again, learning. So if you look at the scientists, right, let's reverse back about 5 years ago. The insights for finding some hypothesis would come from the scientists with the prior experience. And informaticians, biostatistics, bioinformatics, these were always second-class citizens. Scientists would come up with a hypothesis, they will put it in an email or a Word doc and send it, right? And that was okay because they were the subject matter expert. Now, the data became so complicated that it's impossible for one person to conceptualize, to visualize everything and come up with a hypothesis. So I bet you, mark my words, 5 years from now, it will not be scientists generating hypothesis, sending that hypothesis, an informatician cranking the R scripts and stuff like that, and being the second-class citizen serving those guys. It will be data-driven hypothesis generation, and that is my bet. So it's not about who is better, who is less, who is more. That importance of information technology is now being looked at an equal footing as opposed to being a second-class citizen.
Have you seen any startups in that space that are addressing the needs, from an AI perspective of the scientists?
Absolutely, including the one I'm doing right now.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I think a very interesting observation that I've actually seen is I don't think it's a question of who's better. It shouldn't be. So one of the biggest frustrations I had, which is why InterVenn started, was because all of these guys were so siloed. Like the physicians don't like scientists, and scientists don't like physicians. I put them all in one room. They were fighting, literally. Anyway, all of them decided to join us. But my point is this. I think one of the most important innovations that's going to happen in the next couple of years isn't that artificial intelligence is going to change the way you understand disease biology. It's how augmented intelligence augments a scientist that already knows what they're doing, rather than the opposite. So the innovation, your point, there are second-class citizens. My point is it's unsiloed. That's the most important innovation that we, like here in Silicon Valley, can bring to this industry, because it can't be an afterthought. For example, generating data can't be an afterthought. Generating a hypothesis cannot be an afterthought. Right now, I have to admit this. When I got into life sciences 3-4 years ago, I brought my tech hubris with me. I could Google biology. I thought I could. Very early on in that process, I was schooled by my veteran co-founder saying you need to respect biology. So, and 2,000 or 3,000 papers since then, I've learned to appreciate it. And I think the most important thing that I find very interesting in a company, if ever I want to invest in it, is the same thing that I care about myself. It's who's in the team. So if you're saying that you want to come up with this next generation healthcare startup, who's in the team? Like, okay, you've got a physician, you've got a bioinformatics data science person, and maybe you have just a life scientist, wet scientist. That's actually a great team.
Really diverse skill sets, yeah.
Which is exactly what we have. I want to patent it. It's called the golden ratio. So for every life scientist, we have one data scientist, we have one software engineer, and we have one physician. They all work together. It's a must.
Ravi, I know you had something you wanted to say. Maybe?
No.
Okay. So, we hear so much about healthcare costs today, and I think there are stats which say that it's roughly 20% of the U.S. economy. So as you think about this space, health tech space, the healthcare space, what health tech do you think is going to reduce the amount of money that is actually spent on healthcare? And as you think about those solutions, are they solutions that any investors would actually care about or want to invest in?
So I'll kick it off. I think prevention ultimately will have to be the focus. We can't keep growing the amount of money that we spend on healthcare and think that that's going to solve our healthcare problems. And ideally, it's getting ahead before they even start, and prevention is the number one way. And sort of getting back to your point of tech and healthcare working well together, it excites me because when you do see it working well together, it then shows you things like digital biomarkers. So I could take something out of my blood and see my risk for mental disease or cardiac disease, but there are definitely things that, if I were to carry my phone with me everywhere, every day, it could look at the patterns of how I'm walking and what I'm doing and be able to understand if I'm developing, a mental disease or early onset Alzheimer's, and then be able to kick on, well, what are some interventions that I could do ahead of that? It's that kind of stuff that doesn't require a lot of capital that excites me and knows that there's the potential to change things that we just can't do right now.
I think there's a tremendous opportunity. I think the old paradigm, of diagnose, treat, and cure, okay, I think is going to change from screen, predict, and prevent, okay? And this part, the screen, predict, and prevent, cannot happen just only on science, just only on technology. It will only happen, technology and science are the two wheels of the cart. And if you really want to, ramp it up, it has to be both, wheels, generating, coherently the energies. But I absolutely believe, at least in, places like oncology, your only way to cut down the cost significantly is to really change that paradigm from, diagnose, treat, and cure to screen, predict, and prevent.
I like that.
And yeah, in the same breath, actually, what you mentioned about prevention. Again, I'm going back to my famous example of the Alzheimer's. Since it is not going to be cured for a longer period of time, what is our objective? Our now objective is to improve the quality of life of the patient, and by doing that, we are also improving the quality of life of the caretakers. Now, so there's a lot of work going on in many, many institutions. At UCSF, they have figured out that there are glucose fluctuations that could determine the onset of Alzheimer's much earlier instead of getting it diagnosed at the age of 65 or 75 or 85. And when you are able to diagnose it much earlier, maybe 10, 15 years ahead of time, when the disease is just at a very, 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 very early stage, you could now use some of the therapeutic interventions to make the quality of life better.
You know, we've talked a lot about enterprise. We haven't really talked about consumer at all. So, you know, as you think about the watch, wearables, and you think about, you know, the consumer aspect of medtech, are there any opportunities that you're thinking about, you're seeing in terms of going to, you know, prediction, going to prevention, in utilizing some of the wearables that are currently on the market, or any other wearables? I'll tell you, I've got a client that's doing something really interesting with sensors and predicting, and you know, early tumor growth because of heat patterns that are given off. So that's really for the consumer. But what do you guys think?
I worked on one deal when I was at GE Ventures. It was chronotherapeutics, and the idea behind it was it would be a smartwatch delivering drug transdermally. And the first indication was for nicotine cessation. And given the environment we're in now with Juul, I don't know how that's going to fare. But ideally, your nicotine cravings hit very different levels, and the goal there was to hit them before you start so that you could actually stop. And that was using sensors to determine like your blood levels and when you would have your cravings. So things like that are a little bit more novel because the current treatments weren't working well at all.
So do you see the day where your watch is going to tell you you're about to have a heart attack?
Well, I mean, I think Apple is working on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we already see some of the early technology today on that, I think.
I would say, again, you know, just a word of caution. There's a lot of hype built around disruption, and disruption means you eliminate the middleman, which is the care provider. I would stay away. You know, it's going to take a while. But augmenting the care provider with the information that they did not have before itself is a huge value. You know, I think direct to consumer is a very exciting space. It feels like, wow, you're really disrupting. But I think a step before that, I mean, I could position ourselves to be, hey, you know, we have algorithms to automate the reading of a digital, you know, glass slide. And I don't need an oncologist. But we never took that approach because we knew the hurdles are very high. And not just technology, but even, you know, the socio-economic aspect, the psychological feeling, right? An oncologist would never, ever trust your software because there is somebody that they can hold responsible for, their colleague as a pathologist. But if you look at pathologists, 80-90% of what they do is useless work that doesn't need their attention. Computers are very good at doing the analysis, bits and bytes, better than human being. But once that data is presented, interpreting that data, finding the insights, humans are much better today, you know, than that, right? So I think, you know, think of it from that perspective, how you could effectively position it, you know, in a way that is going to help. Okay, I think if I go with our hypothesis of predict and prevent, it's very important to have the data. Nobody is going to type the data, right? So the IoTs, the smartwatches, are the ones that are going to provide you the data more than any human being can ever do. But at the end of the day, how to take that data, translate into a meaningful insight, which will be helpful to give a clinical, relevant, actionable thing is the key. There's too much of data that is generated today. People don't know what the hell to do with it. Okay? And I think the opportunity lies even in that summarization, that abstraction, that aggregation, but creating that meaningful insight or helping providers, you know, deliver that particular stuff itself is a huge service and a great opportunity.
Excellent, thank you. So I think we're going to open it up to Q&A.
My question is for Jeremy. So I'm the CEO of Agritas. We're a startup, and we do exactly what you just said. We take all the data from connected devices, wearables, application or apps. We put it into a secure, ultra secure HIPAA compliant data vault. we're able to take that data, predict potential issues and outcomes, and we're also able to take that through a secure pipe and pipe that into like Epics and into doctors so we can augment their data. And the question you didn't answer is, how fundable are these?
That is a good question. I would say if you have a use case that shows traction, especially early revenue traction, and customers that are vouching for you, I think that is the strongest support in terms of getting funding, and that's what we typically see on the health tech side, even on the ag tech side, because we invest there as well. I will say, because there are a lot of startups, there's a lot of noise, and so those customers can help, but at the same time, getting above the chatter would be the best way, because it is difficult.
Sure. I mean, right now we have HP Health that's looking at us because they have a particular use case. They want to have a real-time data being transmitted from a device they're potentially developing. I can't talk about that, but that is a particular use case. You know, our focus is B2B. Eventually, we want to go to B2C, and eventually we want to be the first line of defense and really get into underserved communities and emerging developing countries, and being that first place where you go to that we can help analyze your health and maybe attach telehealth to that and be that first doctor.
Yep.
Instead of I lived in Indonesia for a while. I understand that healthcare system is not as savvy as ours in a sense. But we want to eventually at some time attack that social aspect. But at first, we really want to attack that prevent sort of part and be able to take all this wonderful data that we have that we're collecting that we're not using at all.
We're not for the right things.
Right, and be able to send that to people that can help.
Yeah, no, it'd be great to get your contact and follow up.
Sure, great, thank you.
I need to mention, and I put in the event description, this is not a pitch event. We actually have pitch events that are formatted for pitching. So this is audience Q&A. If you have a general question about the content, that's great. So no pitches or thinly disguised pitches. And if you do deliver a pitch or thinly disguised pitch, we have a bouncer in the room who'll deal with you. He's right there. So on that note, who's got a question for the panel?
Yeah, good evening. Henry Wong from Garage Technology Ventures. In your life science practice, one of the most common challenges the FDA approval process. Maybe you can highlight your experience, and the panel echo up, tell us what are some of the items that I need to, get when you get all your ducks in a row. Which one are you going to aim at, and how?
So I will give you an example of bioimagine here, and this is just a caution to those who are going for FDA approval, that this was what technology was developed was not necessarily diagnostic at that time, but somehow the web page had mentioned the word diagnostic, and we do not know how they had entered into that, and somebody at FDA must be reading it and picked up on that, and then immediately sent us a letter saying, hey, you are a diagnostic devices, you should come and talk to us. And you end up spending time and money and resources to resolve that situation. Eventually it may be diagnostic, but not now. So maybe Mohan can say more about it.
It was even worse than that. We got a letter, and here is an engineer who didn't know what the hell that letter meant. And so the investor called and I said, are you going to close down the company? And I said, why? Because well, when you get the letter, it turned out that obviously, we didn't understand, we didn't know, and things like that. But the goodness was then I personally went, I presented the situation, and by the way, and we rectified our mistakes. We apologized, we rectified the mistakes. And by the way, we were the first software-only company to get a 510K. There was no evidence of only software getting 510K before us. So I think it does matter, if you take that seriously. But Ravi, you're absolutely right. Don't make those silly mistakes and unnecessarily waste a lot of your time and energy before that. To answer your questions, try to classify it in a way that will be less resistant. So if you say that, hey, we're a diagnostic company, we're going to replace pathologists, the hurdles are very high. Okay? So you position this as, we're just an analysis, we present, and the pathologist would make the final call. The burden of proof is a lot less. So again, being smart or street smart, positioning right will help you. 510K is still better than if it has to be done with PMA, because the hurdle rate is even higher. The cost of doing business is much higher. That means you need a lot more money, and that means a lot less in equity, right? So those kind of things you have to do. So try to figure out how you could classify at the lowest by reducing the claims, and then you can work yourself up.
I think one of the things, that I see, people making mistakes very early on, when I get a client that's doing something in med tech or health tech, and I say, what is your regulatory pathway? And they go, I'm not really sure. That really demonstrates a real lack of understanding as to their business, because if you're going to go for a 510K, or you're going to have to go through clinical trials with 2,000 patients, the company is going to be very, very different, and the amount of money you're going to have to raise is going to be very, very different. And at a more fundamental level, identifying who your targeted investors are is going to be a real challenge. And I see this. I'm not sure whether you folks have already come across this. Is trying to identify a company and who the target investors should be, because when you're in the health tech space, you're software, but you're not a pure SaaS model that every other sort of big Silicon Valley VCs are looking for, because you've got this med tech side. So are you looking for life science investors, or are you looking for the usual and typical suspects that invest in software? So I think very, very early on, you need to understand, and I think, Mohan, to your point, positioning is so critical, not only for the regulatory pathway, but from the very beginning as to how you're going to position yourself. And sometimes, no matter what you say, that you're just a pure, SaaS company just happening to be in the medical vertical, it's really tough, and VCs often won't see you that way. But I think that positioning from day one is critical.
So Moro, actually the current trend is that before you reach the level of it going to FDA, many times the companies are sold. They exit right at that point because they found a partner who could take it to the next level. It requires lots and lots of money to go to that level. So
I have more experience on the biotech side. I will say I feel like med tech, typically they get the approval and then they see early market traction first, but it probably depends on the cut. But with biotech, it's a long path, right? You do tox, you need to see efficacy, safety, and so at the very beginning you need to be thinking about that. But with digital therapeutics, I think Pear Therapeutics was one of the first, but they had a treatment approved by the FDA for addiction, whether it be drug or alcohol, and it's completely done through like an iPhone or your computer, and so that approval process looks very different than something that you'd be taking as an oral infusion.
So I think just from our experience, it's really a phase-appropriate regulatory strategy, rather than looking at the end of the marathon, which is FDA, PMA, or 510K. You have to earn every single step of the process. Like you start with ISO, then you go maybe CLIA CAP, and then you go through some processes. Maybe you get acquired, according to Ravi, in the process of getting an approval. A number of companies like Guardant and Foundation did a very interesting dual approval approach, which is they applied for both at the same time. I don't advise that. We're not going to do that. So it's really phase appropriate. What really influences an FDA strategy for us is how we design our clinical trials. So your clinical trials have to be FDA ready, FDA compliant. So if that's the route you want to take, you have to use that as a guidepost and figure out what parts of your business are affected by that. So for us right now, it's really the way we design our clinical trial.
Excellent. Thank you for the highlights, gentlemen. Thank you.
Yes. My question is about Mohan's comment about a lot of data. Devices are emitting a lot of data. It's not only healthcare devices, but all IoT devices are emitting a lot of data. And Deepak Chopra once said that, there are bits and then bytes and then data and then information, then knowledge and then wisdom. So what I think in all the devices, storing that, like right now, all our devices are emitting data. So we are generating so much data. Storing data doesn't seem to be the answer. If we go a little abstract level and we store, say, information, we don't store wisdom, but at least information we can sift and collect and do that and then store information. Do you see things happening like this? Because data is everywhere and data gets stolen actually. That's the problem with the data. That is breached and there are regulations and all those things, GDPR and whatnot, So do you see things moving towards that in artificial intelligence, that we store information rather than just the data?
Sure, it's a good question. It happens all the time. If you, let's say, take an example of next-gen sequencing, okay? You would rarely find the FASTQ files being stored. You do the first level of analysis, it generates BAM files. You do second level of generation, VCF files. What is that? It's really abstraction of information to a manageable level where you store that.
I see.
Okay, so it is happening. Is it happening big enough? No. The amount of data that is generated and the abstraction, I think, and that's where the opportunity is. Okay,
I see.
there's still,
I
but
see.
it is the trend. It is happening. It has to happen a lot
It
faster.
has to happen. That's
Right.
what I thought. Yeah, thank you.
Well, it
Thank you.
creates a lot of white noise, just because you have lots of data doesn't mean it's going to give you a lot of answers. So at the end of the day, you need to figure out what is the right data that you are going after, and then 90% of the remaining data may not be of any use to you. So,
But right now it stores. It
Yeah.
doesn't forget.
Right.
We need to know the mechanism to forget it.
right. Yeah.
Next question.
Along the lines of digital health records, and especially with counsel here too, who owns their own digital health record? And because you can never get it transferred to that guy or that gal, you could die before you get your health records over to the hospital sometimes. So from a legal standpoint and then an investor and or entrepreneur, do you think the digital health record openness is an area that you're interested in?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think the official story is the patient owns that data. How easy it is to obtain that data, maybe another question. But to be honest with you, I don't actually know, and I don't know with the new CCPA that's coming in, how that is going to be affected as well. But it's a good question. I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
there are two companies that come to mind that actually have very novel approaches. One is called Picnic Health. Check them out. And then the other one is called Citizen II. Basically what they're saying is, their assertion is that patient records are theirs. And they help these patients monetize
Right.
those health records. And I think these two companies are actually very well funded. Both of the CEOs are very good friends of mine. Actually, there's a third one. Jeez, I forget the name. All of them are really good friends. So what they're doing right now is they are leveraging someone's patient records. They obtain, of course, consents, and then they call on behalf,
Sure.
and then monetize, sell I think it's a great business model.
Add to that, the third company is Andaman 7, which actually says if you're a patient, you own the data, and let's say it's spam for Stanford, you have your online account, then they basically use that to really take it and then kind of aggregate. There's no doubt who owns the data, right? The ownership is officially with the patient, but it's impossible to leverage that ownership to really get, because it's a lot of leverage. You're not going to be able to give away, so it's really important. There is a philosophical difference between the approach that taken. For instance, Citizen, the roots came from Apple. The co-founder was a executive at Apple after the acquisition. So their view is very different than the people who are living inside the health, right? So the people who come from outside in, their philosophy is very different. Their approach would be different, The approach would be, screw the middleman.
Right.
Why do you care?
Exactly.
And try to do that disruption. But in reality, it's not that easy even for those. And you've seen that happen, whether it's Google, whether it's Microsoft, right?
Facebook.
They have tried very hard, right? So I think, my view is, you will need the outside in to change. Otherwise, this will never change.
Right.
But if the change is so dramatic, it would be difficult. So some coexistence, some compromise would be needed, and that's where I think the magic answer lies.
Well, working with the middleman, that would be Flatiron Health.
Right, that they are the middleman, which
Right.
actually they may have controlled the whole network by doing that.
Very interesting use case.
But
And
at the
there's
end of the
another
day,
entrepreneur here that knows this stuff pretty well.
talking about the legal part of it, I think it's the legal that will settle the problem who owns the records, because you talk about Facebook and they are monetizing it. You talk about Fitbit or Apple, they are monetizing your data.
Yeah, 23andMe.
Right, it's
that's
no
another
difference
one.
than today the discussion is going on about the college athletes, amateurs, so they cannot get a share of the revenues that are being generated by the university through the TV deals and all of that, right? So it's the same kind of a question. So legal at some point will have to come in and intervene in the process and say, this is the rule of the law, and this is what people follow.
Okay.
That's it.
Sorry, I guess it was a better question than I thought. But, I think Daniel has a question.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So a couple colleagues and I are building a company in the medical compliance or adherence space. Within that context, I was interested in your magic ratio, Aldo, about as we're building up this company, what kind of, you talked about the 1-to-1 to 1-to-1 ratio, do you plan on maintaining that, or at a certain stage of development, then you migrated to maybe more of one versus the other? And if any of you have any other perspectives on that as well, the balance of, I think it was like scientist, data, physician, and computer technologist.
So it's always problem driven. Everything we do is dedicated to solving a problem, and it's always guided by a specific problem. So right now, our current biology is extremely complex. It's one of the first of its kind, but it was based on over 50 years of work. So you really need like the golden ratio to be followed, simply because the computational burden is as heavy as the biological burden, is as heavy as the clinical implication, is as heavy as the software that needs to be built. I see that maintaining in the next, we're launching 4 products in the next 48 months. So we're gonna add another one there. So that's the regulatory commercial person. When you start, because it'll just probably still be 1:1 for the next 3 to 4 years. But let's say you start focusing more on, it depends on your company, like what you believe in. We're very heavy with research. Again, we don't do genomics. It's just what everyone does. We do something way beyond genomics. So it's, we think it's a green field. So there's definitely going to be, we're going to over-index a lot on the life scientists, the wet scientists, together with data scientists, biostatisticians, because there's a lot of research, and I guess as we progress the company, but it's probably going to stay within 1:1:1:1:1:1.
Thank you.
Ramon.
Hello. Thank you for the intro.
Stellar entrepreneur.
Thank you. So thinking about the universe of IoT devices, watches, Fitbits, things like that, and their potential ability to transform and do early predictives, do you see any data privacy, data laws that should change that would really help that or facilitate that? And then the second part of the question is, data laws are different in different parts of the world. So introducing a product or even doing your tests in the U.S. versus Europe versus other countries could have a different cost and things you could actually be allowed to do and not do. So do you see any particularly favorable data regulatory framework for those in any particular country in the world, or just stick close to home?
So I can go back to my blockchain company. So we grew that to 73 countries, 35 different regulatory bodies, each one of them with different regulators, which means they had 600 different opinions. So you have to factor in that you're going to have to work with each one of them idiosyncratically, unfortunately. So our first hire for the blockchain company was Chief Compliance Officer, General Counsel, basically, guy from PayPal. Sorry, QuickBooks, Intuit. In terms of data, so China has their own data privacy acts, so we had to keep physical servers because we predated Amazon Web Services co-locating in China. So you factor it in. It's just like making a product. You factor in piracy costs. Someone's going to copy it, piracy, returns, all those things. So when you think about a regulatory strategy outside of the country, this is the previous company. It's regulated in 50 states, regulated federally, regulated in Europe and a bunch of other countries in Asia. So so it's all idiosyncratic. You have to explain, especially for AI and healthcare. Here you have to explain to regulators what that is already. Imagine explaining that to a regulator in the Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. But you don't have a general. This area tends to be more favorable or less, tendency for fewer hoops to jump through versus.
So if you want
what we have here or most parts of Europe.
Actually, for Australia, it's surprisingly very friendly. Together with, it's easier to run clinical trials there, and they give you 47% back. If you incorporate and you invest money in a clinical trial there. Australia is surprisingly underutilized. So that's one. You can hit the whole EU with the CE. It's one shot, but it's, you need insiders. It's just any normal cross-border type of business, which is what I love about, our trial is representing 7 different nationalities. So it's very interesting how you explain it to a regulatory or an internal review board, actually. That's who we talk to. So just factor it in.
Thanks.
Great.
All right, well, let's give it up for the panel. Let's hear it for our awesome moderator, Roger Rappaport. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for what you've all been waiting for. It's the raffle. So, the prize is this book. Hello, my name is Awesome, How to Create Brand Names That Stick. So, this is one of our speakers. She spoke a couple years ago, and her original book was How Not to Name Your Startup. So anyway, has everyone who wanted to enter already done so?
Should I do it?
Not yet. So, Roger, want to do the honors?
Sure.
And the winner is, drum roll.
How long did you go?
New Life cell, Henriette Echeverria. Come on down. Applause. So is that worth coming?
Yes, thank you.
Smile for the camera. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, just stick around, network, socialize, and connect. The video will be on our YouTube channel within 48 hours, youtube.com/idea.io. As a courtesy to Procopio, would like to leave the building at 9 p.m. If you want to keep the conversation going, either Starbucks or Rosewood, let me know. So thanks for coming. We'll see you next time.